I'm an insane person, and I should not be allowed to walk these streets freely. And the fact that I am just goes to show you how the higher powers of this great country of ours had failed us. I'm also a massive fan of Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick is one of my favourite directors of all time. I love that sleep-deprived looking man, and over the years his films have always been at the top of my top 10, top 5 or top 3 list. Whenever I meet someone who has limited knowledge of his filmography but recognise some iconic imagery like Jack Nicholson's face poking through a door,
I don't sympathise with Shelley.
HAL 9000 apologising today for not being able to complete a task, or someone waving their hat around whilst riding a bomb that will trigger off a nuclear apocalypse. I always get excited to show them the context behind them all. And like a regular Friday night, I was staring at my numerous Kubrick box sets and various versions of the same movie that I own, and I was thinking, how can I turn someone from a productive, functioning member of society to someone who gets giddy when they see hexagonal orange and red carpet? And I think I've found the best method to do so. The method of exposing people to Kubrick's entire filmography follows like a bell curve. But rather than having one end be the person you could have been in high school if you paid the slightest bit more of attention, and the other end being you in reality, we're splitting each end of the curve to cover some of his best films. This way people shouldn't get bored whilst you're constantly insisting to them, oh, it will get better, or starting with his best and then ending with a killjoy, such as Fear and Desire. The middle section will shuffle around between some of his earlier work and lesser known films, which I'm sure will bounce around the person's level of enjoyment and tolerance toward you, but I think this is the best way to get someone to swallow the Kubrick pill. Note, this isn't a best or worst list. All the movies on either end of the curve I love very much, and the majority of the ones that linger in the middle I also think are fantastic. This is an exercise in exposing someone to a filmmaker's entire catalogue of cinema, whilst trying to keep them engaged without having to force them to keep watching, Clockwork Orange style. So to show where I think the person will be emotionally throughout the showstopper journey, I'll use this emotional chart. This should come in handy around the middle section where we're jumping between levels of quality and genres, or it might not come in handy at all, only time will tell. Keep in mind that none of this has been peer reviewed or backed up by science at all. This is just how I'll do it. So if any of you watching happen to have friends who have never seen a Kubrick movie, run this test past them and let me know what it's like. I hear having friends is a very positive thing and I'm desperate to have one. Alright, so when first impressions matter, how are we going to kick off someone's newly found obsession? Well, we'll actually let them decide. 3 of his most well-known movies to start off, but with different genres. You got Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, and Eyes Wide Shut. An action, a horror, and a thriller. So if you're sneakily trying to convert someone to join the Church of Kubrick, opening with any of these on the first date should be a pretty safe bet. I actually don't have an order in which I think you should watch these in, so just let them pick based on the vibes.
That's a war face! Now let me see your war face!
But we'll start this list with Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick's anti-war flick that talks about the duality and contradictions of fighting for peace. The first half contains an iconic and quotable performance from Ali Erming as the hardened drill sergeant, and then transitions into a more familiar war movie from the perspective of a passive photographer. It's got enough iconic moments that I'm sure they've seen this movie referenced somewhere else. It's well paced with the two halves being relatively different but managing to stay cohesive with the story. It's got an interesting enough message about the complexities of war to spark a discussion. After this, I'm sure the person will be laughing, but by the end they'll probably feel miserable. Next up is a film with some familiar faces in it, Eyes Wide Shut. Kubrick's last movie before his passing, yet it's a strong start to the Kubrick journey as we follow Tom Cruise during his twink years through the snowy streets of New York in this erotic thriller/drama co-starring Nicole Kidman. The couple managed to bounce off each other very authentically in this movie as they were actually married during the time of filming. This sparked one of the more iconic scenes where Nicole Kidman and Cruise were shut in a room together with no other members of the crew, capturing an argument in a very raw manner. The plot revolves around a mystery sex cult which explores the taboo side of people's fantasies and how it affects a relationship. And if we know anything about today's generation obsessed with true crimes, I'm sure after watching you'll have an interesting discussion about how this was actually based on a real event. As well, this has one of my favourite open endings to any one of his movies. So for the dirty thriller lover, I'm sure they will leave this movie feeling a bit bashful. My personal favourite out of Kubrick's entire filmography, The Shining is a horror classic. There's so much iconic imagery in this film, from the carpet to the twins to the amazing score, Red Rum, the elevator, the many faces of Jack Nicholson. The Shining strikes the perfect balance of mystery and psychological scares and surrealism. There's nothing not to love about this movie.
What the hell is even that?
The best part about watching this with someone new is to get their reactions and thoughts on the ending. I could honestly talk about this movie for hours, and I have rambled on about it like a lunatic to people before, but it's fun to hear what people actually interpret from it. And if anyone tells you to watch Room 237, don't. It's about as professional as this video, and it's stupid.
And as soon as they touch hands, the paper tray turns into a very large, straight-on, hard-on coming out of Barry Nelson.
Open with this one for the horror fan, as it should leave them feeling quite frightened. Now we're moving into the middle section with the beginning of the Kubrick 8. We have Lolita, with the amazing tagline of "Had they ever make a film of Lolita?"
How did they ever make a movie of Lolita?
How did they ever?
A movie of...
How did they ever?
How did they make a movie of Lolita?
Based on the controversial novel by Vladimir Nabokov. Vladimir Nabokov. That's close enough.
Nabokov.
We follow Professor Humbart, yes, that is his name. If I named a character like that in my Year 4 creative story assignment, I probably would have failed. Despite his goofy name, we have Humbart falling for a 14-year-old girl named Lolita. A story where you feel kinda gross watching everything unfold. I think it's a good one to get out of the way as quickly as you can. That's just a pretty hard sell. Plugging this one into the datometer, I would make sure that you've taken them out for a dinner at least a couple of times, and ensure that you're shaking your head very hard every time Humbart tries to pull something on Lolita. This way the person knows that you're disagreeing with everything that's happening in front of them. If this was the first Kubrick movie you showed them, they'll probably end up feeling pretty cautious around you. Next, we have the one movie that I would honestly not recommend. Kubrick's student film that he then tried to destroy but made its round as bootlegs only to later be restored. Fear and Desire is an absolute slog to get through. However, it should be marked down as a technical achievement, as the 62-minute long runtime manages to slow down time to make it feel like you've been staring at the screen for over 3 hours. It's fairly bland in its presentation, and story-wise it isn't interesting at all. The only real highlight is some nice visuals where you can see his photographer eye at play, and hints of where it will go visually in the future. But we'll try and get this one out of the way as quickly as possible, as it will be forgotten about as soon as the movie ends. Trust me when I say, saying all of this about my main man Kubrick actually hurts a lot. The person will end up feeling bored, so let's move on. Jumping over to his second feature-length film, the crime noir drama Killer's Kiss. This was made in a budget of 2 pennies, a paperclip, and a boatload of ambition, with some hardcore guerrilla filmmaking. Although despite some sequences that are still in my head, such as the mannequin warehouse fight, the story just doesn't interest me. I found this pretty slow and he mastered the genre later on anyway, so I'm placing this early entry to the catalogue in the middle as a throwback to where it all started. But our audience member, or at this stage they're probably thinking victim, would be left pretty disgusted as you've just made them watch 2 boring ass movies. I struggle to call this next one a Kubrick film, as does he, being a work for hire project, although it does have its moments. This epic story is a classic hero's journey based on the real-life legendary rebel, Spartacus, played by Kirk Douglas, co-starring as Chin. Despite its scale, the movie has one thing I would rarely ever say about a Kubrick movie. At times, some of the sets can feel kinda fake. You instantly think of the pond scene that looks like a standard Universal backlot, but it is contrasted with some pretty impressive large-scale action set pieces and sequences. Although being action-packed enough to bring the person out of the lull of the previous 2 movies, I would recommend using the intermission for this one. And after the bittersweet ending, they should leave this one feeling hopeful with the increase of quality. And right after Spartacus, we'll jump over to one of his best films outside of the main 8, Paths of Glory. Starring again Kirk Douglas as the lead, Paths of Glory has a similar structure to Full Metal Jacket. The first half follows one story in an isolated location, and then switches to another side of the story, taking on a different tone. It's a fantastic war movie with some beautiful shots and character moments that make you feel quite miserable, then switching to a kangaroo court drama which leaves you on the edge of your seat as you watch Douglas fight for his men, and no, that's not what we call courts here in Australia. When it's all said and done, you'll be left feeling pretty miserable, reminded of how war benefits the few but destroys the lives of many. 2 stories in one that I believe still holds up, and is a good way to ramp up the end of the middle section of this list. Putting this one more towards the end as it's not as poppy as Full Metal Jacket, so showing this to a first timer could be a pretty melancholic experience. Safe to say the person will probably feel pretty grieved after this. And to give our viewer a tonal whiplash, to round off the middle section, we end with the Red Scare comedy, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
Monsieur! It's in what?
Here we can show them Kubrick's satirical sense of humour on full display, watching one of the most impactful human events in history led by a circle of clowns.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
With Peter Sellers playing 3 impressive characters, we watch a back and forth of ideologies and banter between a large group of characters.
I'm gonna get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's gonna happen to you?
What?
You're gonna have to answer to the Coca-Cola company.
It's smart, it's funny, it's a change of pace from the movies that have come before, and it's quotable enough that you'll be shouting lines from this movie to each other long after it's done.
It would not be difficult, mein Führer. Nuclear reactors could... I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Ending the middle section on a high note, they'll be feeling happy. Alright, so we're now in the top section of this bell curve, and if the person is only semi on board, then these movies should set them over. And if they aren't having a good time, then you can tell them that there's only a few films left, and that you'll let them leave afterwards. So long as they keep their mouth shut for being held captive for 27 hours. I'm bringing back one of his more earlier films to kick off the final section of this list, and one of my personal favourites from his earlier catalogue, The Killing. A short sweet movie about a heist set in an interesting location of a racetrack. I'm bringing this up now because I think modern audience will still find it engaging enough. For a heist movie, it hits the nail on the head. You understand what everyone's role is, you know what needs to be done for the plan to work, so you feel a level of tension when even the slightest thing goes wrong, and we get an ironic twist of fate at the end. I will consider this one of the lighter movies within this section, as the next couple on the list get a bit more intense, yet they'll enter this section feeling ecstatic. Barry Lyndon is a historical epic which I believe is what Kubrick wanted out of Spartacus. I put this movie towards the end because if the person has made it this far, then watching this should be a walk in the park. It's a 3-hour-long masterpiece where every frame is a work of art, utilising natural lighting that creates images that look exactly like era-appropriate paintings. A slower-paced character drama following the rise and fall of Barry Lyndon, every scene has something memorable in it, whether it's the shot composition, the score peaking at the right moment, putting a handkerchief in a lady's brassiere, a duel, or someone writing letters by candlelight. Nothing in this movie feels of its time. If someone was to watch this now, it feels like it could fall alongside some of the modern Scorsese movies. This one does have an intermission as well, so if so, use it, but the pacing is so good that I don't think it will. Covering so much in one movie, our audience members should feel a mix of sadness and joy. Tackling another one of his more controversial movies, I would avoid putting this one near the start as to not put people off, and I believe this one's too good to get lost amongst the middle. Clockwork Orange is a brilliant film about control, expectations of youth, and what does it mean to have free will with a groovy visual style that blends the 70s with futurism. It has become a classic for a reason with amazing sets, iconic costumes and soundtrack. I see this movie as a challenging watch for some due to the pretty graphic scenes, but it's accessible enough for people to follow they can get hooked on the rise and fall and rise again of Alex. Despite the subject matter and acts of violence towards the start of the movie, it's worthy of sitting amongst Kubrick's greats. The last line from Alex will get them feeling a little smug. Very close second as my favourite Kubrick movie, but without a doubt, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies of all time. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a brilliant, perfect balance of entertainment, intrigue, visual spectacle, pretentiousness, and ending this list with a thought-provoking masterpiece so the person leaves with a sense of awe. It's a movie that pushed the visual effects of its time, and without this movie it wouldn't have inspired such films as Star Wars, Interstellar, Alien, and the list can go on. At the time, the movie was a bit of a wet blanket, but then it got a second wind at the box office as people were told the ending worked well with substances, which I cannot comment on. It's one of my favourite movies to show people so you can have a deep discussion about the meaning of the ending, the evolution of the human race, life beyond our species, and if AI will ever get to a point where it can do a task without failing. My Alexa still can't manage to understand the most basic of requirements, so we're not there yet. Everyone who I've introduced this movie to has seemed to have enjoyed it, so I believe it's a perfect movie to finish off this list and encapsulates the best qualities of Kubrick as a director. It's a lot to take in, but as the score crescendos, they'll be left feeling overwhelmed with joy. And now your victim should be a Stanley Kubrick expert. If they didn't at least like one of these movies, I would recommend taking drastic actions against them. You're now probably asking yourself, did I really need to watch this entire thing to find out there are 2 Kubrick movies that aren't worth the watch? No. So the more we can spread the word of this underrated indie filmmaker to new people, I say the better. He is not doing so hot nowadays, so I'm sure spreading the words of his film would make him feel a lot better. And if anyone actually uses this list to watch his filmography for themselves or with someone else, let us know how it goes. And if you are familiar with his movies, let me know how you would change up this list. And should I make a list for anything else? Thinking of doing a similar one to an introduction to horror, like going from the late 70s to early 80s through to the slashers, psychological thrillers to the meta stuff that we're seeing nowadays, or maybe bring it all closer home and do something with Ozploitation. Either way, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching.